I'm focused on the way an emerging threat, if you like, to the life chances of millions because of the way the AI recruitment tool development industry is taking off too fast, in my view. This is a response, of course, to a problem triggered by technology, because now you can have thousands of people apply for an individual job, and the role of the recruitment function is, in a sense, to discard as many as possible to try to find the ones that warrant a human intervention. I wanted to focus on one in particular. This is the HireView model, but other companies are doing the same. So I'll talk a bit about the video interview process. But of course, we have things like scanning the internet for everything you've ever put up about yourself and then giving the employer your psychological profile on the basis of what they see. Or one of my least favorite, I guess, is the virtual reality assessment that drops the job seeker into an ancient tomb. It's the Raider of the Lost Tomb approach to recruitment. And the candidate is expected to navigate their way through all sorts of, groovy, cool little challenges. A friend of mine who's been in a wheelchair his entire life, he's saying, does it drop me in as I'm in a wheelchair? Probably not. Does it drop me in as a walker, in which case I'd freak out? Right, I've never seen myself walk. But the point is that nobody's even asking these questions. The model that has had the most impact so far is this assumption that the employer nominates an ideal employee, let's call him Harry, and the machine learning microanalyzes Harry in terms of his face, his expressions, his sight lines, his voice tone, his word choice. Does he look up when he's clever, down when he's lying? And then they have interviewed, HireView has alone, 9 million people through the video interview. And they have no idea how many people with disabilities tried to get through, how many were discarded, how many were in the database. There are no disabled people in that employee database. And of course, we know that people with disabilities are much less likely to be in work. So they are, hence, if you're not in the database, you never will be, because the risk here is that it just reinforces a pattern of recruitment that replicates people you already have. There are a few things here that really concern us. One is the debate about bias in terms of AI recruitment never references people with disabilities. So the reason I grabbed the chance when Stefan suggested to be here, I need you all to go out there really talking about it all the time, because none of the debate about ethical AI or responsible AI talks about the potential impact on 20% of the population or the 1 in 3 50 to 64-year-olds that have a disability. There are 3 things here that really struck me. Most of the debate is on bias, which is the database problem. Let's be clear, the science, though it's interesting, the University of Melbourne's calling it the quasi-science. I'd love to have a chance to debate you on that front. The science has not been validated on persons with disabilities, just hasn't. Then they're claiming that a standardized process, because this is more than the technology, this is how it's deployed, the processes behind it that the candidates have to go through. They're saying that a standardized process removes human bias. But any sensible HR person knows a rigid process is discriminatory by definition. So for example, with HireView, you have 3 minutes to answer the question. Everybody. That's supposed to remove human bias. Not 3 minutes 15 if you stammer, and it takes you a little longer. How do you lip read a robot was another line that was going through my mind. So the standardized process, the assumption that somehow the technology magically removes human bias has to be challenged by developers and by the buyers. And then the third thing is that the database never takes into account or includes the behavior of the employer. So how can it accurately assess the job seeker who is the best for the job only if the employer lets them use JAWS, moves a parking bay, lets them start at 10? So it can't possibly take into account in the first assessments accurately predict the performance of a candidate who requires the employer to do some basic adjustments or accommodations for them to succeed. So it's flawed at every step of the way. So the good news is, I think we're seeing growing awareness now as we're bringing a community of thought leaders together. IBM at the table from day one. The World Bank is now starting to look at this with us, the European Disability Forum. The University of Melbourne yesterday saying that they're very concerned that they address this in the way they are looking at it from the scientific perspective. Oxford, Brookes University, the Australian Employers Network on Disability, because we see three sort of key factors here. Buyers will need to be more careful. We need to enable the employers who buy these tools to ask the right questions of the developers before they take the risk. Interesting, in the States, they're predicting a $3 billion hit on employer liability insurance. Maybe the insurance industry would resource some of what we're doing, because they're predicting a whole range of people, not just disabled, but including them, are going to start to sue on the grounds that they've been treated badly by an algorithm, when actually it might not even be that. It might be the standardized process that kicks in around it. We need guidance for the developers who genuinely don't know what to do. Because, of course, 10% of your workforce in a large company will probably have a disability, mostly, 80% non-visible? Are they going to tell you? How do you pull that out? And are we more concerned with the disabled people who aren't in work? Because they're the excluded ones who aren't going to get in unless the data about them is much more finely nuanced. And thirdly, we're seeing an interest from regulators. I had a meeting with the Human Rights Commission in Australia recently, and I threw out the idea, surely developers should be required by law to prove their assessment tools are safe before they can put them on the market. If you put a teddy bear on the market and the eyes might be swallowed by a child, the regulators pull the teddy bear. But a tool that could knock out millions and millions of people in terms of damaging their life chances, particularly as this grows exponentially, as recruiters increasingly turning for help to these tools to make their way through thousands and thousands of applicants. The interesting response was yes. So I think we're going to see a real interest on the part of regulators to not just have, I will sue you through the usual routes under employment law, but actually consumer protection. And ironically, if that's the word, we have two consumers, the individual who's trying to get a job, but all the recruiters locally are now using that, and they can't get through. And the buyers are also the consumers, who are now at risk, legal, reputation, and, dare we say, the risk of losing good people. My aim for the artificial intelligence community in all this is that these AI tools are designed to liberate human judgment, because it cannot be a way of taking the responsibility off the human recruiters to discard people without somehow having agency and governance implications for the company itself. I'd say what needs to be done to minimize potential damage to the life chances of hundreds of millions who have a disability, because we know extreme users, right? If systems work for extreme users, they work better for everybody. So if you can get through an online recruitment process and an AI-powered assessment, and you're speech impaired and you need subtitles, probably someone with English as a second language is going to find it easier to get through. You know, we know that it's a way, in effect, of acting as a litmus test for discrimination in a system. I think in terms of next steps, we need to tell the stories and bring this more alive. We need to, we're talking, James Partridge is here from Face Equality International, and we're talking about how we can bring people with facial disfigurements and speech impediments and people who have Botox that kind of didn't go too right, and all kinds of things, together to say to camera, I can't get through, and how do you lip read a robot? And I couldn't get through, just to start to get people to think about it, because I think genuinely most of the developers just never occurred to them. And so when I talked to the guys at HireVue, they were quite interested in saying, well, we don't know what to do. I didn't pick up anything that said, we don't want to do something here. But first we have to get this on the agenda. I was very heartened that the Oxford Brookes University is launching a new AI and ethics institute. We met on Friday, and they're saying, we haven't even done our website yet. We want to raise the profile of this. This is exactly the kind of potential ethical stroke reputational AI-related thing that we need to be addressing now. So we need your help to get that out. We need buyers to start to say, you have the power to slow down what's going on in terms of the developers, asking them evidence they have validated this, evidence that it does not discriminate against someone with facial disfigurement. And you've also, of course, got the power to say, we need to challenge that standardized process, removing human bias assumption, which is simply a naive assumption, because the developers don't understand that we treat people differently to treat them fairly. They haven't got that yet. But you can, as buyers, I'm hoping I've got lots of buyers in the room, say, we need to work with you as developers to make sure that we're getting this right. And certainly from our perspective, we're bringing this community together to say, let's look in practical ways at what guidelines would help buyers, what insights and guidelines help developers, what do the regulators need to know, and to look at the intermediaries and say, you need to know more about the way employers actually operate. If you're going to coach someone with a disability into a job, you need to understand what hoops they have to jump through to get in. My worry is that many of the organizations that are funded to help disabled people into work all over the world don't understand what's going on from the perspective of the employer process, what the individuals are going to have to go through. So they can't coach the individual to come in and say, actually, you guys, I suspect you're using HireVue. Actually, it's not going to work for me because, but there's some good practice which says that you should actually have 2 or 3 routes in. It shouldn't just be HireVue. And that requires intermediaries to be closely attuned to what Safaricom's doing on the ground, how you recruit, and make sure that you enable the individual to negotiate a more equitable and fair journey through that process.